Hi everyone, welcome to the video. My name is Monty if you're new here, and today I'm going to be sharing with you 5 books that I have binge read that I think that you might too. Before we get into the book recommendations, I want to be clear about what binging a book feels like to me. To me, it's not reading a short book that you can just get through quickly. When I'm binging a book, I cannot put it down. I cannot put it down. All I want to do is be in that world. All I'm thinking about are those characters and that plot line. It's an all-consuming experience. So I do want to prepare you for the fact that there are going to be a couple of longer books on this list, but I still feel like you can quickly read them because you're going to be so engrossed in the story. So the first book that I want to talk about is Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. This is actually the first historical fiction book that I ever read, and it's kind of the book that I attribute to getting me back into reading as an adult. Before I had ever picked this book up, it was described to me as a story about the building of a cathedral. And I was like, okay. And this is where I learned that you cannot judge a book by its description, because yes, this book is about the building of a cathedral, but it has so much more going on. Although I will say that the parts devoted to the building of the cathedral were actually really interesting and well done. But again, there's so much more to it. There's politicking, there's this tension between church and state, and then the corruption within those separate entities. There's revenge, there's betrayal, there's tons of drama, and there's actually a good bit of romance too. This book is almost 1,000 pages long. It is definitely one of the longer books that I've ever read in my life, but I'm telling you, not once while reading this did I ever get bored. It's one of those books where you're so happy with its size because you never want it to end. And when it does end, I'm happy to tell you that there are 4 other books in this series. So this series is called the Kingsbridge series. It's the name of the town that this book takes place in. It takes place in England. I don't know if I said that already, but there is a prequel to Pillars of the Earth and there are 3 sequels. I have read 4 out of 5 books in the Kingsbridge series. I'm kind of waiting to read the 5th book. It was just released in 2023. I think that the second book is my favorite, but Pillars of the Earth has a special place in my heart because it's the first one that I read. You technically can read these books out of order. The main characters in each book are the descendants of the characters in the previous book, and each book takes place in a very different time period in England, but I would personally just read them in the order that they were published. If you haven't read these and you enjoy historical fiction, I implore you to read these. The next book is a romance novel, and it was also one of my favorite books of 2023, and that is One True Loves by Jenkins Reid. I would argue that most romance books are pretty bingeable in the sense that they're quick and easy to read, but I wouldn't describe them all as all-consuming. Like, usually in a romance book, I'm not constantly thinking about the characters or the storyline when I'm not reading the book. What sets this book apart from other romance novels is that you don't know the outcome of the story. You don't know which 2 characters are actually going to end up being together, and it just makes for a really engrossing read. This is about a woman who gets married to her high school sweetheart and her boyfriend of many years. They're in a very healthy, loving relationship, and one day he goes missing in an accident, never to be found again. She eventually moves on from her loss, and she reconnects with an old friend and eventually falls for him and gets engaged to him. A little while into their engagement, her husband ends up being found and he returns home, and so she's left with this decision between who she wants to spend the rest of her life with, her husband or her fiance. And I honestly didn't know who she was gonna pick. Like, I didn't even know who I wanted her to end up with. I read this during my first and only 24-hour reading challenge, and I just flew through it. It was like the perfect book to read for that challenge. And I just loved the way that this book ended. I feel like this would be a really good book for some discussion. I had my best friend read it after I did. It was just so much fun to talk about the decision that the main character made and whether we agreed with it and what we would do in her shoes and da-da-da-da-da. I just really loved this book. If you're looking for a romance where you cannot predict the end, I would highly recommend. The next book is the only book that I actually have a physical copy of, and I did in fact read this in one day, even though it's like 560 something pages, and that is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. I don't know if you can see it that well because of the lighting, but if you look this book up, you will see that it's classified as science fiction, but in my head, it fits better into dystopian fiction or even just general fiction because there is very little to no science in the book. And I have a science fiction book that I'm going to talk about later in this video that is heavier on the science. So let's think of this as general fiction or dystopian fiction. So Ready Player One takes place in the future in either 2044 or 2045. And in the book, we're following a teenager named Wade who lives in extreme poverty. He lives in what's called the stacks, which is like trailer parks that are stacked on top of each other to save space. And basically to escape his very dismal surroundings, Wade basically spends all of his free time logging into this virtual reality world called the Oasis. At the very start of the book, the creator of the Oasis dies, and prior to his death, he has developed this treasure hunt sort of game that exists within the Oasis. And after his death, in his will, he states that whoever can solve the treasure hunt, whoever can find the Easter egg, will inherit his entire fortune and also inherit the rights to the game, which would make the winner very, very wealthy. And you can see how this would be particularly enticing for someone in Wade's situation. So Wade enters this contest and we just follow his journey. If you're into puzzles or games, competition, adventure, this is most certainly the book for you. The biggest critique that I've seen about Ready Player One is that it contains a lot of 80s references. So if you grew up after that time period, you wouldn't understand a lot of what's going on. But honestly, it didn't bother me at all. I didn't even really notice it. This was a book that I wouldn't put down unless I absolutely had to. And that's why I got through all of these pages so freaking quickly. Highly recommend. For the next category, I felt like I had to include a thriller. I personally don't think I've ever given a thriller a 5-star rating. There's always just a little bit something that's missing for me, but probably my favorite thriller that I've ever read would have to be The One by John Mars. This book is very Black Mirror-esque, so if you like that show, which I do, then I would really strongly consider picking this book up. In this world, there exists a DNA test that can match you with your genetic soulmate. We're following, I think, 5 or 6 different perspectives and seeing how the results of this test impact people's lives in different ways. And it gets dark very quick. There's one perspective of a serial killer. Another perspective is of the creator of the DNA test. Another perspective, I think, is of someone who's in a marriage but not with their match, and they're trying to grapple with what to do. And I don't remember the other perspectives, but I do know that I was fully invested in every single storyline. I was hooked from the very, very first page, and I think this is another book that I read in less than 24 hours without even trying. Each chapter leaves you on a major cliffhanger, and because you're following all of these different perspectives, you don't get to circle back to that cliffhanger until like 4 or 5 chapters later. And there are just constantly like new things coming to light, and it is such a wild, wild ride. I feel like there's no way you wouldn't binge this book. The last book that I want to talk about is my science fiction pick. It's another book that ended up on my 2023 best books of the year, and that is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Like I said, this book definitely falls under the science fiction category. There are a lot of scientific explanations, but fret not, it is still very, very digestible. So the book opens up with our main character waking up on a spaceship completely alone, and he has no idea how he got there. What? So the rest of the story is unraveling the details of why he's there, how he got there, etc., etc. There's some jumping between timelines. You get to see him back on Earth and kind of like the events leading him to his current predicament. And I really can't tell you any more than that because I would be giving away spoilers, but it's another big adventure story, and it's just another book that kept me fully engaged from start to finish. So that wraps up my list. Please let me know down below a book that you have binge read so that I can add it to my TBR if I haven't already read it. Also, feel free to let me know your thoughts on any of the books that I mentioned in this video, whether you agree or disagree. We're here for the discourse, okay? Don't be shy. My next video that is going to be coming out after this is going to be a reading vlog, a little bit of a how much I realistically read in a week while working full-time, with a little bit of an additional twist that you will see. So you can look forward to that. But in the meantime, I hope you are all doing so well, and I will see you in the next one.